We are incredibly honored to have two distinguished guests with us here today. General Stanley McChrystal, former commander of U.S. and international forces in Afghanistan and former leader of Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC. A one-of-a-kind commander with a new perspective on organizational dynamics, General Stan McChrystal is known for helping elite teams tap into the potential of their people to better compete in a complex and interconnected world. Few can speak about leadership, teamwork, technology, and international affairs with as much insight as he can. After retiring from the U.S. Army as a four-star general, General McChrystal turned his expertise to the business world. He is the founder and CEO of the McChrystal Group, which helps Fortune 500 companies strike the right balance between hierarchical and decentralized team mindsets and structures. He and his firm focus on the power of network analysis and machine learning to strengthen how companies connect internally and externally. As the author of several best-selling management books, General McChrystal offers a battle-tested system for detecting and responding to risk. In a world where things are moving at a speed we've never experienced, we need leaders now more than ever. After 34 years of service in the U.S. Army, including as commander of U.S. and International Security Assistance Forces, Afghanistan, and the commander of the nation's premier counterterrorism force, General McChrystal can deliver innovative advice on leadership in addition to solutions for businesses across the world to help them transform and succeed in challenging, dynamic environments. Director John O. Brennan served as director of the Central Intelligence Agency from March 2013 until January of 2017. As director, he was responsible for intelligence collection, analysis, covert action, counterintelligence, and liaison relationships with foreign intelligence services. From January 2009 to March 2013, Mr. Brennan was Deputy National Security Advisor and Assistant to President Obama for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism, shaping and coordinating Obama administration policies on counterterrorism, Homeland Security, pandemics, cyber attacks, and natural disasters. Mr. Brennan began his government service at the CIA, where he worked from 1980 to 2005. During his career, he served as the CIA's daily intelligence briefer to President Clinton, Chief of Staff to then Director of Central Intelligence George Tenet, Deputy Executive Director, and CIA Chief of Station in the Middle East. In 2003, he led a multi-agency effort to establish the National Counterterrorism Center and served as the center's founding director. After retiring from the CIA in 2005, he worked in the private sector for 3 years before joining the Obama administration. Mr. Brennan graduated from Fordham University in 1977 with a bachelor's degree in political science, conducting field research in Indonesia in 1974, and studying at the American University in Cairo in 1975 and 6. He earned a master's degree in government from the University of Texas at Austin in 1980.
Well, look, it's really a humbling honor for me to be here with you guys today. Two of my heroes that have sacrificed and served this country with a long, amazing record, who continue to serve actually now as well. And we just really appreciate the time you're willing to spend with us today, help support the More Perfect Union movement. I want to begin with a question that I'd like for both of you to respond to, both as citizens and national security leaders. I'd like to ask each of you to speak about the division in the country. What concerns you most about that division and the rising partisanship in America today? And maybe let's start with you, Stan.
Sure. If you go back and look at the United States before the Civil War, and I'm not saying we're cruising for a civil war, but there was a time about 1850 when we changed from talking about political issues to having a more visceral dislike of people from the other part, the North or the South. And we stopped listening. And so suddenly, once we're to that point, it's very hard for us to address any issue, large or small.
Yeah.
And so what scares me now is we are starting to perceive ourselves as polarized. We are starting to identify in a way that is either with our particular tribe or group, and we shut off ideas from the other. And how do you sit down and how do you address hard topics when that's in the room?
Thank you. John, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, picking up on Stan's point, I mean, there seems to be more and more intolerance these days of others' perspectives. This is a country of rich diversity. I mean, that's our history. We're this melting pot of people from all over the world with different backgrounds, different religions, and perspectives. And the importance of listening to your neighbor or another family member is, I think, going to allow you to have a better appreciation about all the different views that we have here in the country. But there seems to be this intolerance of other people's views and not willing to listen. And also, as Stan pointed out, we have so many challenges these days as a country, both domestically as well as internationally. And if we're angry at one another, we're going to not be able to address the real issues that are going to affect the future generations of Americans, our children and grandchildren. And unfortunately, I see these divisions playing out in the halls of Congress and in community organizations and other things. So there just seems to be so much animus that is really, I think, distracting us from being able to focus on the things that really we need to focus on in the future if we want to enjoy the security and prosperity in the future. And again, I just keep thinking about future generations of Americans. They deserve to have that security and prosperity that we've enjoyed during our lives.
That's a great point. And actually following up, John, along the lines of security, thinking about our national security, do you think our adversaries are actively seeking to promote and aggravate this division in the U.S.? If so, what are the methods that they're utilizing to kind of stoke that division? And what do you think America needs to do right now to help combat that?
I don't think our adversaries are fueling it. I know they are. I've had firsthand experience in terms of how our adversaries around the globe want the United States to be divided in itself. Because if we're divided, then we're not able to exert the influence that we have globally. So whether it's a Russia or a China or others, they use oftentimes these days information operations. There's so many opportunities these days to push information out, including in the digital domain as a result of the proliferation of social media. And we see it in our presidential elections and also other elections as well. They will feed the views of the extremes in order to, again, increase that anger that exists within certain parts of the U.S. society. And what I think we need to do is to be able to encourage people to really have an opportunity to listen, not just to the echo chamber that maybe fuels their own perspectives and views, but try to get a better sense of what the truth is. And it's difficult these days, given that there's so much disinformation and misinformation out there. But clearly our adversaries, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, want to see us divided, because when we're divided, we're not able, again, to act in some type of unified way to be able to deal with the challenges that we face.
I'm hearing a real theme of listening here too, which seems to be like at the core of what we can do in helping to kind of help get us out of this mess, right? I mean, we are constantly talking at each other and not listening to each other. So I really appreciate that perspective. Stan, to you, you and I have talked a lot about this problem over the last several years, actually. And right now, American citizens now routinely vilify other Americans on the other side of the political aisle. The level of animosity and vitriol right now is such that some American citizens feel the biggest threat to their safety and welfare is actually other Americans. Sadly, many of our elected leaders right now aren't doing anything to temper down that sentiment. In fact, they're stoking it for their own gain. What do you think the role of leaders can and should be in this really important moment that America's in?
Yeah, Jay, thanks. And I think it starts with what the role is of too many leaders right now, and that is political opportunism. And if we look at what happened in other countries like Rwanda in the early 1990s, where you vilify another group because it's in your interest to do so. If we look at 1930s in what became Nazi Germany, the same thing. You pick a group, you vilify them with the idea that it will get you popularity and get you some level of support within your own party. And the sad part is it works. And it works pretty well. And so what we found is a number of leaders in the United States now, they find somebody else to point at. It's their fault. They are the problem. And as long as we allow leaders to do that successfully, for it to be politically effective or advantageous for them, then we're going to be stuck with it, because political animals will do what works. And so what we as a nation have got to do, starting with we as voters, we've got to not accept that. If we see that level of behavior on the part of these individuals, we've got to call it out and we've got to vote them out of office. Now, that's easier said than done. But the vast majority of Americans are doing their job every day. They're reading certain things, they're thinking certain things. They're not racist. They are not hard either one way or another, but they are, because they're distracted by life, this group of leaders can grab them and they can take certain things that aren't full truths and they can leverage them into emotion.
America's just trying to survive. Right?
That's exactly right. And so if we watch other nations which have gone down this path and the pain of it, there's always a group of people who have found it advantageous to do that. Now, we've got to identify them for what they are. We've got to use a political process to punish them, meaning put them out of office. Once you do that, others will adapt their own behavior, because if it doesn't work anymore, they'll stop doing it. As long as it works, this is what we'll see.
It's almost like we would love to see more moral courage in our leadership. Something as simple as what we were taught, even in the military, just do the right thing, even when it's hard, right? I mean, they need to be able to speak. Thanks for that, Stan. John, over to you really quickly. So there are indications that popular support for democracy in this country is in decline and actually beginning to be questioned, that support for strongman authoritarianism is on the rise, and that Americans' trust in democratic institutions is at an all-time low. What do you think is causing this? And, are you concerned about this decline, or do you believe, as many pundits do, that this is like a temporary phase that America is trying to navigate through right now and will come out of it quickly?
I think democracy by definition is messy, because it's going to be a process of debate, of discourse, of differences of views, and you try to hash that out. And you come up with laws and policies that are going to, again, advance the interests of the country overall. And unfortunately, I think there are a lot of folks, including public officials, who are no longer supporting and advocating democratic principles. They are trying to win partisan games, and they look at things through that partisan prism. And, whether it's ideologically driven, politically driven, or for partisan objectives, they want to do whatever possible, again, to come out on top, to include denigrating their opponents, disparaging the institutions of governance, to denigrating the rule of law. All of this that really makes up this great country of ours, the democratic institutions, those institutions of law enforcement or intelligence or military diplomacy, all of that really is what makes this country great. And when you have individuals, and it's not just members of Congress or the public officials, there's a lot of social influences out there, again with social media, who continue just to misinform and disinform the American public because, again, they're trying to accomplish their ends. So it's whenever I talk to young students in universities, and a lot of them are saying, I don't want to get involved anymore in government or whatever. They had applications in. I said, no, now is the time for you to be engaged, because our country needs individuals who are really going to live up to the responsibilities of their office, whether it's elected office or whether it's appointed office or civilian leaders in our government. This is something that I think this country really needs, particularly at this time of such challenge. But unfortunately, I think there are a lot of individuals who are looking at government now as being them, and trying to undermine them. Well, the government is supposed to be of the people, for the people, and by the people. At least that's the ethos of this country. And unfortunately, there are too many individuals who have the pulpits in the public who, again, are advancing their interests, their agendas, again, at the expense of the underlying democratic values that at least we're supposed to be holding so dear.
I think, as we're talking here a little bit, I believe so powerfully that the way out of this is leadership. And I think, servant leadership is a core value and a component that More Perfect Union was actually built on. And, throughout our history as a nation, there have always been those who have been willing to step forward from the rank and file to serve others, whether it's military, intelligence professionals, Peace Corps, AmeriCorps. It's in our DNA as Americans. And, Stan, I'd love to ask you, what role do you think Americans who have served can play right now in helping to combat the fear and divisiveness in the country in this important moment?
Yeah, I think that people who've had some experience in an organization where they've been given the opportunity and the expectation that they would lead, sometimes at a very junior young level, have gotten an opportunity to understand that you've got to connect with the people that you lead. As you know, leading Marines or leading people in government service, difficult, or in my case in the Army, you have got to respect who they are. You've got to empathize with their perspective of the world, and yet you've got to get a mission done. Yeah. And so there's a very practical side of it, but there's always a, I think, a moral side of it. And I think that people who've had some experience in an organization where they've been given the opportunity and the expectation that they would lead, sometimes at a very junior young level, have gotten an opportunity to understand that you've got to connect with the people that you lead. As you know, leading Marines or leading people in government service, difficult, or in my case in the Army, you have got to respect who they are. You've got to empathize with their perspective of the world, and yet you've got to get a mission done. And so there's a very practical side of it, but there's always a you exist because of them. They don't exist because of you. You exist to help them get the job done, because ultimately that's where it gets done. So I think that experience and that ethos or habit, I'd like to believe, that people who served pick up is really key. The other thing is, most of us at some time or another have been sort of on the execution end of national policy, and we've been impacted in some way by politics. And so you have a perspective that says, if people on the ground are going to be well-led and well-served and do things that matter, then people at a higher level are going to have to be responsible. People at a higher level are going to have to be guided by the kinds of ideals and the kinds of values that we think are important. So I think you've got to have generations of those people with that early experience that move up to senior experience. I think if we look at most of the famous leaders in American history, they may not have served in uniform or in government service, but they did something that shaped them with an idea of responsibility to something larger. Because the idea of servant leadership, I think, is sometimes difficult for people to get their minds around. It's really serving the larger group, the larger cause, the larger idea. It's not just about taking a position of authority because I have the talent or I have the opportunity. It's about the purpose of it. And so I think if you build that into our culture and you celebrate it and you also demand it of all of our leaders, and every time we see people who have gone up to be very senior leaders and they don't exhibit that, they don't demonstrate it constantly, we as an American society have got to hold ourselves and them to account.
I love that. This issue of accountability for our leaders, it is so hard in our time too, with the partisanship and the primary election system the way it is. But I do think there is a level of accountability that we need to take to basically up level, to the leaders that are in office right now. Let me tease that out just a little bit more from you, Stan, and John, feel free to weigh in here as well. In this moment across the country, probably less than 1% of the population have actually served in uniform in some fashion or form. What do you think? Is there an important role for them to play in bringing the country together? Because of our shared experiences in service, whether it was military or intelligence community. Do you feel like that's a unique role that we can play?
Jake, I do, but I'd start with someone should not be in elective office because they were a veteran.
Agreed.
Because as we know, there were smart veterans and not smart veterans, and good veterans and not good veterans.
Yes.
So that qualification is not a ticket to a position of real responsibility.
Amen.
But I would say that those people who have had that opportunity to serve, who have the values, who have the ability, I hope that they would be motivated to say, I can do even more. And I actually have a responsibility to do more because I've been given that insight. I've been given that experience, and maybe I can step up to do it. And today that's asking an awful lot. I get young veterans ask me all the time, should I go into government? I'm always conflicted because part of me says, yes, I desperately want to see you in elective office. On the other hand, I know the pressures and the experience, and often I care about them deeply, and I don't want them to have to experience that.
Yeah.
But they have to.
Right.
We need them. It's just like combat. There are times when you got to ask people to do hard things because they're the right people to do it. So that's what I would ask those young veterans now.
Good. John, do you have anything to add to that?
When I was director of CIA, I would administer the oath of office to all the new incoming CIA officers, and I would do it in CIA's iconic lobby in front of the memorial wall, where we had the stars of those CIA officers who had fallen in the line of duty. And as I raised my hand, I would tell them that I remember vividly when the first time I did that, back when I was 24 years old, when I first entered the CIA. And it's such a solemn obligation that we have when you recite the oath of office, that the responsibility you have to your country, to your fellow citizens, to your fellow teammates, but also, someone who's come into the agency is, 24, 25, 26 years old, they already, I think, can exhibit the traits of leadership. the honesty, the integrity, the commitment to teamwork, all those things that are going to allow them to rise up within an organization because they have demonstrated those qualities that really are necessary in order to achieve an accomplished mission. Whether you're in the intelligence community or military or diplomatic corps, you want to be part of an organization that really is doing something that's greater than just your own self, that is really contributing to the greater good, to your country and also to global peace and security. So that solemn obligation, I think, is just so critically important. And a lot of times, individuals who have served in the military or in the government have that perspective. But I think every citizen, I'm the son of an immigrant. And my father, who was a naturalized citizen, would always say, he got mad when he said that a lot of American citizens who are born citizens would take for granted the great honor to be a citizen of the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, people from around the globe strive for their entire lives to come to the land of opportunity so they can start a family, have work, and also just enjoy what it means to be alive in this great world of ours. And so I think we should always remind ourselves that we are in a country of exceptional good fortune, which is how I define American exceptionalism. No other country has the type of exceptional good fortune that we have had. So I do think that whether or not you're a public official or you're working in government, federal, state, or local, or you're a citizen working in communities or in private sector, I think you have to remember that this is a special place, the United States, and you need to live up to what that ethos is and what the whole purpose and the concept of being an American really means, I think, to not just to us, but for people around the world.
I love that. I love the power of the idea of America and what it represents for the rest of the world. Just one more question for both of you that I'd like for each of you to respond to. As you may have heard, there's a pretty important election coming up here in November. Tensions are pretty high. Instability could follow in the months and weeks that follow November in the election. As you know, this conversation is being recorded for the 2024 More Perfect Union Fellows that are going to be convening later this month in Missoula, Montana. Now, these fellows are going to be trained and equipped with the skills that they need to go back to their home communities, back to their home states, to help turn down the temperature and help stabilize our democracy to the best of their abilities. I'd like for each of you, if you can, speak to them in this moment. What words of encouragement or inspiration could you give them as they go downrange to execute on this important mission? Maybe, John, if we can start with you.
This is a critically important election. In some respects, people think it's an inflection point in terms of our democracy and our journey as a country. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to be able to talk to one another and then listen to one another. It's, I think, almost impossible at this point in our history to say that we are on a single path. No, we're divided in many respects. But I think it's incumbent on people, such as those who are attending the More Perfect Union get-together in Montana, to be able to work with their communities and sit down with folks and encourage them to take a look at the other side and to listen to the other side and not be emotional and angry at others just because they hold different views. We all hold our own views because of our background, our perspectives, where we live, where we come from, the things that we hold dear in life. But I do think it's important, particularly on the eve of such a contentious election, that we have more advocates out there of people who are willing to talk, to listen, and to encourage collaboration, if we can do that within the political environment. But I do think it's critically important at this stage that we do whatever we can to, again, bring the temperature down and to be able to have discussions with each other about what those differences are, and maybe we can find ways to help bridge those differences through that discourse.
Thank you, John. Stan, you want to bring us home?
When I think about what feels like a disagreement right now, it feels like we're in an argument. If you've ever been in an argument like I have, where you're not sure you're completely right, but you argue even more violently because you're sure you're not completely right. So if I talk louder, if I get more excited, maybe I'll win this argument. But I would go back to those times in our country, like the American Civil War. There was a day after the Civil War. At Gettysburg in July of 1863, almost 50,000 Americans were made casualties, and we literally tried to claw the guts out of our opponents. But a couple years later, we started rebuilding the nation, and then suddenly we start to become one again. Even after the Second World War, where the world was torn apart, very soon after, we realized we had to come back together. So there's a day after. There's a day after this election as well. And so if we think about the election, not as a winner-take-all, absolute, we must win event, but instead as part of a process that is going to get us to a place where we are one America again, then I think how we talk, how we interact during it, and then after the election will be key. Veterans can play a key part in that. You've seen it up close when democracy doesn't work around the world. And you've seen it up close when we have people who were our enemies and then now to become our friends. And you suddenly can step back and say, let's just start that part of the process earlier.
Amen. That's well said. Thank you so much for that close. Thank you for your time today. And thank you for just continuing to serve, your lifelong service. And we're honored to be in the stack with you in this fight for America.
Thanks,
Thanks. Thank you, Jay.